All right, wonderful. It's great to see all of these faces just pouring into the room. We're so glad to have you with us here today. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us for Don't Leave Us Out, How to Tap ARPA for Opportunity Youth and Systems Involved Youth. We are so excited to have you here with us today. This event is co-sponsored by the Forum for Youth Investment and the Children's Funding Project. And then we also have some amazing guest speakers with us from Los Angeles County and from the city of Minneapolis as well. So excited for this great event today. So much rich content. As we get started here, if folks could go ahead and make sure that your Zoom name reflects both the name that you'd like to be called and also your preferred pronouns, that would be a great way to get started. And then please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. If you could just share your name, your organization, where you're located. I know we have people coming in from all over the country here. And again, your pronouns, that would be just wonderful. We're going to do a little bit of a get to know one another activity here at the beginning, just a little interactive poll as people join us before we dive into our regular program. So I'm Mary Ellen Wiggins with the Forum for Youth Investment. I'm our Director of Policy and Research. Sorry to not have introduced myself at the very top. Delighted to be here with you today. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joanne Pano, to do our Get to Know You poll activity.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Hey, everyone. It's so great to see so many wonderful faces on the screen. I'm Joanne Pano, pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Forum. With our next question, we just wanted to get a sense of who's in the room, which organizations and roles you actually represent in this space. So we're about to launch the poll. If you can please click on what field do you work in, we'll have the questions up for a few seconds just to give folks a chance. Seeing a range of folks in direct services, state policy, advocacy, local policy, federal policy, and other. Give folks a few more seconds while you're entering in your responses. Great. Well, thanks so much for everyone for participating. It looks like a majority of folks, well, actually it looks like a combination, to be honest. We have 22% of our folks here in direct services, 14% in advocacy, 13% in state policy, 7% in local policy, 7% in federal advocacy, and the highest number of 36% labeled as other. So we look forward to today's conversation with you all and also listening and learning about the incredible work that you're all doing from your states and localities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joanne, and thanks so much to everyone for participating. What an interesting and diverse audience we have here today. This is really fantastic. So let's go ahead and dive on into our program. So I know that everyone here knows that the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, has really offered a lifeline to so many communities and youth and families. There's just so much money that's come in through ARPA for states and localities, which has been really critical. And as you all know, in a number of cases, there's really been a sustained and a very concerted focus on critical populations or needs, areas like K-12 and childcare and early learning. But as is so often the case, much too often the case, older youth, when we say that, we're thinking particularly youth ages 14 and up through mid-20s, particularly youth who are not connected to the workforce or to school, or who may be involved in other systems, public systems, just don't receive the same level of attention and of dedicated funding for their holistic needs. So whatever role you have as you join us today, whether you're a policymaker, an advocate, a service provider, a young person, someone in our fabulous other group that I'm so curious to hear from, we are going to go through some really actionable insights that can help you wherever you're coming from, again, to really think about what you might do to either understand where ARPA funds might be in your community, what the status might be, how to access them, and then to get wonderful ideas from our colleagues in Los Angeles and in Minneapolis about what can you do with those funds and how might you also leverage other funds so that you can really start to address those holistic needs of young people in the ways that they deserve. So concrete questions like, how can I help secure ARPA funds and where are we in the process? And then questions like, what programmatically might I be doing and how can I get that going? So we're going to hear from folks individually. We're going to have some interactive poll and Q&A, and then we're going to go into some really rich breakout rooms so people can really dive into the nitty-gritty with one another, ask their questions, and then hear directly from each other. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Kylie Wheeler from the Children's Funding Project, who's going to answer some of those level setting questions for us. Where are we at ARPA? What's been done and what's left? Kylie, take it away.
Thanks so much, Mary Ellen, and I'm so grateful to be here with all of you today. It's so refreshing to see such a mix of actors, people who care about youth on this call. Also very curious about who makes up that other category. I suppose I should share my screen. Let me see. So like Mary Ellen said, my name is Kylie Wheeler. I am the Applied Research and Policy Manager at Children's Funding Project. And if you're not familiar with us, we are essentially an organization that works with states, communities, at the grassroots level to advance strategic public financing on behalf of children and youth. And what that has meant for us over the past couple of years, going on more than a couple of years, is supporting the work that people in communities and states are doing, the work they are doing to leverage the federal relief funding that has come down as you know, a fortunate benefit of the deeply unfortunate pandemic. So just to do some like bird's eye level setting here, just wanted to give us all a reminder of what these past couple of years have looked like in terms of federal relief. And of course, we are going to be focusing in on the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA. And ARPA overall included so these numbers are a little bit more of an art than a science, but about 210 billion for children and youth. That also includes flexible funding, which is what we're going to talk about here in a second. And to zoom in just a little bit more, here were some of the funding streams that were included in ARPA as it was originally passed. And you'll see up top here, these first two line items, these make up the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, which is going to be the focus of what we are talking about today, because they are particularly flexible. So just to, we have been as a nation and as practitioners, we have all, we've had a lot of money over the past couple of years, but part of the challenge has been, particularly for those who are not the budget holders, is accessing and effectively leveraging these funds in a way that meets both the immediate need and sets us up for success in the future. So we're going to be talking just a little bit about kind of where we are now, like Mary Ellen said, where we are in the process, and what opportunity may still be there, particularly as it relates to state and local fiscal recovery funds. So just nuts and bolts timeline for state and local fiscal recovery funds, starting back from when ARPA was signed into law, and really starting for us in our discussion today, this summer, as the second half of state and local fiscal recovery funds have come into your counties, cities, states, your tribal governments. So at this point, almost to our knowledge, all of the money has been dispersed as part of the state and local fiscal recovery funds. So we are now at an interesting point, because if you look at these next two milestones, we have a couple of years, a little less than a couple of years, to continue to make plans for these funds. And by December 31st, 2026, a little under 4 years, all of that money has to be spent. So between now and December 31st, 2026, we have this really special opportunity to advocate for any of these funds that have not yet been obligated, which we're going to get into in just a second. But this definition of obligation was really helpful to me, because this can, I don't know, I find a lot of the language around these things confusing sometimes. But so when we talk about obligation, just read this. An agency incurs an obligation, for example, when it places an order, signs a contract, awards a grant, purchases a service, or takes other actions that require it to make a payment. So all that means is having an official plan for those funds. That needs to be done by December 31st, 2024. But between then and 2026, those funds don't need to be expended. So all of that to say, it is very likely that there is still some opportunity in your community, in your state, to either, depending on your level of influence, and that is going to vary based on, how you defined yourself at the beginning of this session. But there is likely opportunity to further influence the direction of these funds. So just really briefly, and I know these slides will go out after the presentation, but when we're talking about state and local fiscal recovery funds, there are really different reporting requirements and like different milestones and deadlines for compliance that states, territories, cities, counties, tribal governments, towns all need to keep in mind as they are making their plans. And these do also, one of the big reasons I wanted to include this here is the level of reporting that any given jurisdiction is required to do is going to impact the level of transparency and the level of planning and obligation that we are going to have access to as a public. Because if you are a very big city or county, all of your plans need to be out on the table. But if you are coming from a county or a city with under 250,000 people, for example, the level of information you might have is going to be almost entirely dependent on how transparent your jurisdiction's public reporting processes are. So just wanted to include a note about that. And then, so really the first question is, do you know how much money came into your community as a part of the American Rescue Plan? And one way that you can, if not, and if you need a refresher, Children's Funding Project has developed really a database that includes allocation information for really thinking about that laundry list from before for many of those funding streams. So you can search by state, you can search by just recipient name, but highly encourage you to explore this tool. But that aside, so I'm gonna once I'm done, I'm gonna post a series of kind of resource links that can help you answer some of the questions that may come up as we go throughout, including that tool. But part of what we really wanted to do today to set us up for this conversation is kind of give you a sense of what we do know about where the state and local fiscal recovery funds, how they've been spent or how they've been obligated so far. A little more than a year, a little more than a year in. So the National Association of Counties and the National League of Cities and Brookings Metro partnered on a really amazing tool. If you haven't checked it out yet, where they are scouring local plans for the state and local fiscal recovery fund, state and local fiscal recovery funds, and giving us all a much clearer sense of how cities and counties are allocating this money. And the one limitation here, so you'll see, we're only looking at 329 local governments you know, 4,500 projects that they're tracking, because they do track. I just think it's super cool because they track it on a project by project basis. We're not just looking at what is this city or county doing generally with these funds. There are line items for each project, which is just fantastic. So right now they are tracking a little over 25 billion, and by their estimation, only about 33% of these funds are budgeted. So that tells us that, you know, on the super optimistic side, you know, man, math is hard, but 67% of that funding may still be, you know, able to be influenced, or at least asked about, you know. And so the limitation here is that, you know, like I said earlier, only cities and counties above a certain population threshold are required to submit the types of plans that NLC and NACO and Brookings are tracking here. So what we're not seeing as we look at, like, for example, these categories that the tracked projects are falling into, this reflects probably the general spread for larger cities and counties, but it may not be reflective of where your city or town is at this moment. Or so I just wanted to make that clear. But you'll see, you know, a little under half of funds so far have been budgeted toward government operations, which makes total sense. You know, next up, public health, and then, you know, a fairly even split between infrastructure, workforce development, and community aid. So it gives you a little bit of a sense. And I should have said this at the top, but, and I guess I did a little bit, but we are focusing on state and local fiscal recovery funds, but it is not it's not the whole puzzle. It's just one piece of the ARPA puzzle. And I say that because another thing that Children's Funding Project has been doing with our American Rescue Plan web resource that I mentioned earlier and that I'll link to in just a bit, we have been tracking innovative uses of ARPA funds more broadly for children and youth across the cradle to career spectrum. And in a similar way, tracking those line item projects at the city, state, county, territory level. And so I just want to put that out there. But I did pull some analysis from our tool. So again, we're just looking at projects that meaningfully impact children and youth. From what we've tracked, we've seen about 5.1 billion in state and local fiscal recovery funding allocated or meaningfully allocated toward children and youth in some way. And you can see the primary investment areas that we're talking about. And I dug in a little bit more to see, okay, what portion of this state and local fiscal recovery funding of the projects we are tracking, just to be clear, is going toward older youth in any form. So not even specifically opportunity youth or you know, the population that we are talking about today. But of the 5.1 billion, only about 31 million can be meaningfully, you know, paired with that demographic. And so to Mary Ellen's, you know, what you said at the very beginning, this kind of clearly reflects just the relative dearth of investment that we see, even when we're looking within the child and youth space and investment. So finally, you might be asking, okay, well, is there still time for me? Depending on where I am sitting in my community, how far my policymakers have gotten in this process, in the decision-making process, is there still time to access this money? And as you see here, the answer is maybe. And really answering that question is going to involve asking 3 primary questions that we've already touched on, and that, again, I'm going to put some resources in the chat right after this. So the first being, how much funding was originally allocated to your city, your county, your school district, going outside of the state and local fiscal recovery funds and just thinking broadly? How much of that funding has already been obligated or expended? Like I said, this is going to be your difficulty in answering this question is going to be proportionate to really the size of your city or county, because you're going to have better, or not better reporting, but more information because of the size of the of your jurisdiction. And if you do happen to be part from a city or a county with less than 250,000 population, you might have to do a little more digging. And there are a number of ways to go about that, but the hope is that your jurisdiction will have some kind of its own public hub on its website. Most do, that are as clear as possible about kind of what's been done so far. But if not, you have to start thinking about your relationships with the folks that are making these decisions. And, you know, or your peripheral relationships with people who have relationships with the decision makers or the budget holders. And thinking about how you can get to a point where you can ask them questions that you cannot answer easily, assuming that you do run into challenges understanding, okay, how much of this funding is already spoken for? And just anecdotally, and this is the last thing I'll say, we have been working directly with a wide range of people in communities of different sizes, different makeups, and there is just wide variation in where decision makers are in this process of allocating the funds. It feels sometimes like there isn't a lot of rhyme or reason to how this all is coming together. So my advice would be, don't assume that this money's already gone. It is worth asking questions and doing some digging, because it could be that your policymakers, your decision makers are looking for some help to get this money out the door in a way that benefits all community members. Because again, going back to, this is a lot of money, and you know, you have the influence and especially we have 22% of our folks here today are in direct service. You have the knowledge that they need to get these dollars out the door in a way that makes an impact. So that is what I will say, and I think I am passing it to, and look really not artfully at my notes. Going to move to some audience participation. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right, Kylie.
Okay.
Thank you so much to Kylie for all of that really great information. It's just a remarkable amount of work that Children's Funding Project, as well as other institutions, have done to help bring some transparency to what's going on with these funds. So thank you. At this point, we'd love to do 2 things. One, invite any questions that you may have for Kylie on the topics that she just covered, the status of ARPA funds. Invite you to put those questions into the chat. And then I will also hand it back to my colleague, Joanne Pano. She's going to lead us through our next poll.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. And so as folks are thinking about, the different ways that ARPA funding can be influenced from where you sit, who those policymakers and decision makers are in your states and localities, we do have a second question that we wanted to ask folks. So you see it on the screen. Do you know the status of ARPA funds, particularly state and local recovery funds in your jurisdiction? And so we'll give folks a moment to go ahead and enter in your responses, and then we'll share it out with the group. Give folks a few more seconds. All right. So we just shared the results there on the screen. You can tell that folks are within the space of not sure. Sometimes it's hard to tell.
Thank you so much, Joanne. And it's so interesting to hear where folks are and to see the diversity that we have in terms of folks who are here. Got a number who are working with ARPA funds directly. So again, I'll invite folks to use the chat if you work with ARPA funds directly and you want to drop something in about what you do, what your role is, that would be fantastic. If you have a question for Kylie, then please go ahead and put it in the chat, although I will note that she's going to be in one of our breakout groups later, so you'll have another chance to ask questions if you need to. And if with that, we will keep going here. So next up, we're going to get to hear some really wonderful insights and information from our wonderful colleague, Jose Perez, who is the Assistant Director for the Los Angeles County Department of Workforce Development, Aging, and Community Services, which in just a matter of a few days, I believe is going to become the Department of Economic Opportunity. So he's a very busy man going through that transition, and we're super lucky to have him with us today. Los Angeles County is doing a lot of great work around an initiative called Youth at Work. And so Jose, please join us to tell us more about what you're doing in Los Angeles, what we can learn and what others might do.
Sure. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of our experience with Youth at Work program. Maybe I'll start off with some brief background on the program itself and how that evolved into what we call Youth at Work Elevate, which is an ARPA funded initiative that's kicking off within weeks. Youth at Work is, think of the traditional summer youth program, but what the county did back in about 10 years ago was to make this into a year-long program with the definite commitment of providing paid work experience to 10,000 youth. So it's an ambitious effort, and we've been able to hit that. But there's been some concerns and really about the level of engagement that we pay for 120 hours of paid work experience, which is wonderful. But as our older youth kind of transition out, and many of them are not following the college pathway, the concern is how do you start changing that work experience to something more meaningful? When the ARPA dollars opportunity came, and I'll back up a little bit on that in a bit, we've experienced what the program does, its limitations, as well as its successes. And in partnership with a few of our community-based organizations and community partners, we've been talking about making this effort more meaningful and for targeted populations. LA County is huge, as you all know. The funding came directly to the county, and it was significant. I don't know if our experience could be replicated elsewhere, but to Kylie's point, always ask and definitely show the opportunities and outcomes that are possible through your proposals. And I'll come back to that. But bottom line for us, it was a call out to county departments on initiatives. Now, WEDAC's, DEO, were small departments, but we were able to get a significant chunk of dollars. Just on the workforce side that I oversee, it was over $60 million available to us. And part of the reason for that is having a successful base program that we knew needed enhancements. We had the community support, we had the data, and be able to show how we can expand beyond what we were doing. What Elevate does is target specific opportunity youth. So this is youth experiencing homelessness, foster care youth, justice involved youth, and LGBTQ plus youth, and targeting them for 400 hours of paid work experience. It ties in a significant mentorship effort. It includes, and it really does target employers that are willing to commit to employment. The basic argument here is, sure, 128 hours of paid work experience is valuable to the youth, but how impactful is that opportunity? For the employer, it's great to have an extra pair of hands, but is that relationship being built? We felt that 400 hours, and we would have liked to have gone even further, allows that opportunity for that relationship building to happen from the employer side and really want to invest beyond this program, as well as from the youth side to be able to see that this is actually good work that I'm enjoying. We also wanted to identify high road career ladder employers and opportunities. So as we're working on the adult side of workforce development and identifying well-paying jobs that are the jobs of the future, like electronic vehicle manufacturing, these kinds of things, we wanted to tie those employers as well with the youth program and through Elevate. Very high level overview, but we were able to get actually it grew to $10 million to fund this program, and we aim to serve over 500 youth through the program. I mentioned the value of data. Our department is very data rich. We not only capture WEO, that's the federal workforce funding source. We have those requirements, and we track the ability to track those outcomes, but we go beyond that in terms of demographics, in terms of other support services that we tie into. So I say that because it allowed us the ability that when we put forth our proposal, we could show not just the 10,000 youth that we place, but also what neighborhoods they're coming from. We have 5 supervisorial districts in our county. Each supervisor could see data specific to their region. So we had wide support to be able to implement this. Also, we track demographics. That's important because I know it's part of the Arpa federal legislation, but also part of a significant part of what the county implemented, an equity plan, and being able to show that that's already our focus and tie that with the county's, we call it Equity Explorer, but ability to track by census track where the need is and where underserved populations are. And because it is COVID related, where the COVID had the biggest impacts, we were able to leverage that data and show that not only have we provided services, but we'll be able to target the populations that we want to look at. So again, data rich, and the infrastructure to be able to track that is critical to us, not just in our existing program, not just in the accountability, but in our ability to pitch proposals when the funding opportunity presents itself. Okay, to touch on equity. Give me one quick second. Oh, processing that because there was a few prompts here. I told Mary Ellen I'd handle perfectly, but obviously I didn't. What process in terms of advocacy? I can't stress enough the value of our community partners. Yes, we have the data, we have the passion, we've shown some results, but so are a lot of other programs out there that need the resources. Our ability to have a community voice is critical to this. Some of you are those community voices out there in your respective cities, counties, states. It's critical that you're able to get your hands on data, work with whatever partner has that data, and be able to kind of be part of that. If you're working through a government agency, through that government agency to say, here's the problem, here's the data, here's how we can help. My experience, and it could be limited, but a lot of times wonderful organizations pitch us on how they can help, and that's extremely valuable. But being able to really define the need and the solution around data is extremely important for us to be able to just grasp it in terms of our own languages, but also to sell it to our leadership and our elected officials, because that's often their language as well. They have a passion, but they want to see numbers because there's plenty of passion out there. So again, it's data rich, but also community being part of that process. Government tends to feel that we have the answers. We might, but not really. And even if we do, a lot of it is based on our assumption of what the community wants. The build it and they shall come kind of approach to programs. That's something that in LA County we're trying to get away from, as well as just really practicing what we preach, and having that community voice is critical. Just some key lessons from the process. So So it is a bureaucratic process. What Kylie mentioned about the possibility of unspent funds is actually the result often of slow bureaucracy. Being able to, when we pitched this back in, believe it or not, March of 2021, I went out there and said, if we're properly supported, we will get this program up in 2 months. And here we are a year later, and we're talking about implementation and rollout. And because that's partly because the support wasn't there, and it's also partly because we had to pivot and abide by these ARPA regulations. So to the extent that you are aware of an agency or an organization that's gone through the accountability part of this ARPA funding, definitely ask specific questions on that and how you can help. Interestingly enough, we're one of the departments that stood this up faster than most. So yeah, a year is not fast to me. So you can kind of see our dilemma. Being able to kind of leverage and anticipate some of these bureaucratic, I was going to say nightmares, but challenges, that's important, and learning from each other is key. I think the other part of the key lessons is when the money's out there, I keep on talking about community involvement. Well, community is involved, and sometimes your bandwidth is limited. So there's this level of impatience of, you want to be involved, here you are, here's the opportunity, we need this information. There needs to be that trust and patience between partners to be able to get through that. I think we've been able to do that through our partnership, but there's still challenges. I mentioned one of the key components of this is mentorship. Some of our partners the bandwidth has been maximized, and they could not support this program no matter how much they wanted to. So that's part of our latest delay in being able to bring on a community-based provider that can assist. Bandwidth just sometimes isn't there, so we need to be flexible, pivot, and adjust as needed. And lastly, the staffing support, and I'm not just talking about government staffing that works through this, but also community-based organization, and making sure that they're properly supported in their roles in these programs. That's critical. That's critical for an effective and successful program. And I think sometimes we overlook that. So keeping that in mind is important. Just overall, just what's next in terms of this space. LA County is doing some pretty, we feel, important and innovative work. We stood up a youth commission, which is one of the new departments that's starting up on July 1st. It's the commission is evolving into a department and really bringing in youth voice into the government side of the discussion. Obviously, it's done through a community voice through outside of that, but we've built an actual department that will really amplify that within the organization, within the bureaucracy. And I've talked a little bit about a lot about community involvement. There's something, and maybe this might be just more for larger cities, counties. We're huge. One neighborhood in LA County, it may have different needs or different voices from the county in general. There's also large CBOs that are large and therefore often seen as part of the kind of bureaucracy that's already built in the institution. One of the things we're looking at is just the discussion on hyperlocal community-based organizations and contracting opportunities that open up to these organizations. That involves supports, that involves some education, but that also involves lessening of these stringent contract requirements. It's something that we're working through equity and county contracting work group. But again, the idea of just kind of taking one hit and saying community is important and moving on just doesn't work anymore. We have to reinforce that and make this an evolving conversation and evolving opportunities. Okay, I kind of rushed through that there just to kind of give opportunities for questions. So I'll stop there and see what's next on the agenda.
Thank you so much, Jose. Sorry, Caleb, you're getting a little bit of feedback there, so I'll just jump in. I want to say thank you, and you did a perfect job with all of the prompts. So thank you, much appreciated. And there's just so much rich, great information there, particularly around engagement and the role of data and thinking hyperlocal. And I know we'll hear more about that from our wonderful colleague Andrew Groot in Minneapolis as well. I will say, if folks have questions for Jose, then please do flag them in the chat. Looks like we may have one. in the chat for you. Sorry. Okay, Jose, we have a question here. Did you have any success with engaging construction, Black and brown young men, system involved, gang involved young men, excuse me. I'm trying to read this correctly here. Excuse me, gang involved young people. That question comes to us from Edmund Norton.
Yeah, thank you, Edmund. Great question. Yes, we've had some success through our, and it isn't because back to what I said, it isn't government going out there and engaging. It's actually engaging it through trusted community-based organizations. Young men, young African-American men and Latino, that's a significant part of our of the folk that we serve. And I do credit the having the trusted messengers out there to kind of get the word out. I will add something here, though. One of the things we saw that was a significant gap was actually addressing the needs of our Asian Pacific Islander community. We saw that our numbers were below targets, and being able to just look at that data and see immediately that we had a gap there, we were able to address it. This was outside of Elevate, but part of our Youth at Work program. But again, data helps to reinforce what we think is right, and we can adjust as needed. Hope that helps.
And Jose, we have one more question here for you in the chat from Jennifer Mayer. I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. If folks want to learn more about your work, or if they have employers that they'd like to recommend to you, what should they do?
I'll post something on chat and also share maybe through you, Mary Ellen. Employer engagement is going to be critical, and so definitely need that. The only reason I hesitated a little and smiled is, again, we're moving to a new department, and our website is one of the stragglers on this. But we will, the link we provide you will be able to get you to what you need. And I wish I memorized our social media tags, but our team is doing a great job of putting that out. I only follow Instagram, so I don't know what the others are doing, but I'll also share that contact information. And what I'll probably do, I think the existing website does have some Youth at Work information as well. And finally, as Elevate rolls out, I'll share some of that as well through this group. That's okay.
Wonderful. That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you again for the great work that you do and for sharing it with us today, especially during such a busy time. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. We are so excited to have with us today Anne DeGroot, the Executive Director of the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board, who's going to talk about some of the outstanding work that they have done directly with Arpa dollars, particularly thinking about an inclusive approach to hyperlocal needs. So really focusing on some great perspective that Jose teed up for us. So Anne, if you want to take it away.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. I'd be happy to. I always like to talk about our programming. First, I should tell you a little bit about the Youth Coordinating Board, because the reason we got the money is because of how we're situated. We're a joint powers board, and we're an intermediary between four public entities in Minneapolis. We are an intermediary between the City of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, the Minneapolis Public Schools, and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. So we're a small little independent board of the city and the county and the parks and the schools, who helps to bring those four entities together to find ways to create programs and projects and solutions for children to have healthy lives. So in July of 2021, so just a year ago, the City Council voted to allocate $1 million to the Youth Coordinating Board to re-grant to after-school programs. They had been in quite a process of understanding the value of after-school programming in order to keep kids safe, to provide a service to working parents so they know where their kids are, to help young people to develop skills that they don't develop in school. So we were asked to redistribute this money, and we developed a process to do so. They, in their resolution, required that $60,000 of that money go to the Cedar Riverside neighborhood to do youth outreach. And that neighborhood is highly populated by East African immigrants. So we put 60 into that community through the West Bank Business Association, who's going to do that outreach with us. And we do outreach as a part of our work. The other $940,000 we were allowed to distribute in the way that we wanted to do that. So we set up a process of a request for applications. And we ended up at the end of the day with 47 applications, totaling $17 million. And we were only able to fund a small portion of that, which we did. I should make just a little point here, which is to say that we're using this process to help educate our government officials and also our business community about the need to have more funding for after school. So something that Kylie has worked with us on before is figuring out how we create a youth fund in Minneapolis that can be used specifically for after school. Now we have quite a lot of material to show why we need a youth fund. So we're very excited about that. I want to highlight 3 elements of the process that have been important to us. The first is that we engaged young people immediately. They were engaged in the development of the RFA. They were engaged in reading through all the applications. They were engaged in site visits, and they were engaged in the decision-making. Now, we have a very easy way to do that because for 15 years now, we've had a group called the Minneapolis Youth Congress who we work with. And this is a group of young people, grades 8 through 12, who work with us to help make sure that young people's perspective is represented in the government entities who we work with. Their tagline is "No decision about us without us." And so we really try to make sure to live that with them. So one way to do that is to bring them into this process of determining how this money was going to be spent. And through that work, they actually had us, I should say, maybe that way, it sounds a little funny, but they encouraged us, and we did, add to the proposal or to the RFA that people would get extra points in the process if they had young people under 25 in leadership, if they had Black and brown people in leadership. And they were very clear about saying that the programs needed to be grounded in youth development principles. So they brought those things to us, things we would have thought of, but that was theirs. They said, we got to do this. We can't just have it be sort of anyone. Secondly, we engaged providers, those who provide services to young people in terms of after school, in the process of creating the RFP as well. Some of those people are people who work in government entities who work with young people, like Minneapolis Community Education or the parks or the libraries. But some of those people were from some of our community-based nonprofit organizations. And we really reached in to find people who might not otherwise have been asked these questions. Through that process, they identified that if the grants could be larger and for an extended period of time, so 3 years, that would make a bigger difference to any of them. Even if they didn't all get money, but they got a bigger amount for a longer period of time, it would be more meaningful to them that they could do much more with that kind of money. And so that's what we did. The last thing is that we use data from the city to target areas of town to promote the RFP in. And if you were part of that part of town, you got a little extra point. And the reason for that is we really were trying to target Black and brown communities. We're trying to target communities where there's poverty. And those are the communities in which COVID had a bigger impact. So we used data to determine which those neighborhoods were and gave extra points to people if they were from those neighborhoods. One thing I would say, and I don't know if other people are in this position, but because of our position as an intermediary, the funding for this actually came to us. We re-granted it, but we're the recipient of Arpa funds from the city of Minneapolis. And it put us in a position to be able to advocate for some of the rules that government has to be used in a different way. So for example, our city wanted us to have all of the recipients bill for the work they'd done the month before, so that it would be reimbursement. It's a typical government process. You're all familiar with it. The people we were giving money to do not have the kind of money to do a month and then get billed for it later. right? They also don't have infrastructures always to create that kind of a system. So we effectively advocated with them to not do that. So we don't do that. So we pay out at the beginning of each quarter 1/12 of the full amount that they're going to receive, and then they can spend that in line with their grant. The other thing that I would say that we've used this as an opportunity for is to help people develop a continuous improvement process in terms of their after-school work, to understand how to collect and use data. So they go through training with us. We have a thing called M3. It is making meaning of multiple data sets. And it's a way to look at a lot of data and try to come up with, what does this data mean? And how are we going to use it going forward? So we have engaged those groups in that process with us. And we'll use that to encourage them to attend additional trainings and things like that. The last thing I would say is one of the outcomes of this for us has been that the Minneapolis Public Schools requested that we distribute $500,000 of their money through ESSER funds. They loved our process. They sit on our two Minneapolis Public School board members sit on our board chairs from the school board. And she came to me and said, I loved what you did. I thought it was great. It was a wonderful process. It was transparent. It was open. Will you give away some money for us? And we, of course, said, okay, we will do that.
So really, for folks who are interested in youth engagement and best practices, Anna's a really great resource, as are her many colleagues who do this work regularly. And obviously, Jose in LA, there's some really great work that's happening around a youth commission and a new department that's becoming. So we are going to, we still have a couple of questions in the chat. So let's maybe cover one of those here, and then we can move into our breakout rooms, since we will have a chance for folks to talk directly to Anne or to Jose or to Kylie or to some of our forum colleagues like Joanne and Caitlin Johnson, who's also on, or myself, about either policy or youth engagement or advocacy work, depending on your perspective. So to hop to the question that we have, let's see. Antonia Rangel Carril is asking to understand the process of who to reach out to access funds. And she's asking Jose in particular, who were you connected to and what was the process of submitting, or when did you submit your proposal?
Yeah, I think we might have had, as a government agency, a government department, we might have just had that step up of, one, we were informed of this opportunity, and two, we were given that access to provide proposals. I'm not, part of what we wanted to do as well, and other departments are working through, is a requirement that we make very available. So it's not just the usual posting here and there, but engage in community discussions so that the community is aware of contracting opportunities within this funding. That's where I think we falter sometimes, of being able to make sure that folk that should be knowing about this do know it, unless you're active and engaged ongoing with, in our example, county government. It's a little difficult. We even have this challenge sometimes with our partners in the city of LA. Their community organizations are not aware of what the county's doing sometimes. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of the communication. But yeah, specific to our experience, we did have, I wouldn't call it a red carpet rolled out, but we had that venue available to us. And yeah, I mean, that's part of the discussions we're talking about, of opening up contract opportunities, because there's work to be done.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. And that question came in, and before you were making your remarks, that I know you talked a lot about just inclusion and reaching out. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add on Antonia's question.
About reaching out and inclusion, it has to be intentional, and it has to be thoughtful, and it takes time, and it takes people. And that's what I'll say. I think that's enough for now, because Jose answered a lot of that kind of question.
Great, wonderful. Well, as y'all can see, we just have a wealth of knowledge here amongst our speakers. We're so glad to get to hear from them sort of individually. And now we're going to move into a breakout session Kylie, I think that you are going to be our guru here on breakout rooms and getting us going. So we're going to have 3 different rooms. One is going to be a chance to talk about policy, particularly with Jose. And Jose, I believe you and I are going to be in that one together. There's another one to focus on advocacy. And that's going to be a great chance to speak with Kylie and Caitlin Greenleaf-Johnson. And then the third will be youth engagement. And that's a chance to speak with Anne and hear more about the processes and the standing youth body that Minneapolis has. And then I'll be in that group as well. And we'll spend a good 15 minutes together there, just a chance to hear from one another and our experts. And then we will come back together for some closing reflections.
And Mary Ellen, I think you and I will need to join. We'll just have to click the join button when we're ready.
Right.
But everybody else should be able to self-select.
If you're anything like our breakout room, you are in the midst of a really great discussion. And so somebody got caught off mid-sentence, but I hope it was a really good sentence. And feel free to share any insights that you're still having or questions that you still have in the chat so that we can think about how to address them or how best to share information. Thank you so much to our speakers for leading such great breakout discussions. I'd love to take a moment here as we do, yeah, exactly. I would love to take a moment here as we start to wind up and get towards the end of our time to invite Jose and Anne each to offer any reflections that they may have from the discussion rooms that they were in and things that they have heard throughout this conversation. So Anne or Jose, is there anything that you'd like to offer up?
I'll say this. I am always very impressed when I'm in these kinds of meetings, how much people really want to have young people engaged in the work. And it is really a sincere desire of folks. And I know that it's something that not everybody has experience doing. So Mary Ellen, I mentioned that we're going to be doing this book about how to do this kind of thing. And I'm hoping that's helpful, but the desire is there. So if there's any way I can be helpful, my email's in the chat. Please feel free to get a hold of me. Be happy to connect you with actually our staff who actually do the youth engagement work. I just get to talk about it.
Yeah, same here. My staff is really what makes this work. And I'm sorry, I seem to be having low bandwidth, so I hope you can hear me, but I can't click on my video. Yeah, no, I mean, I think just from our breakout room, but also just experience that passion's always there. It's a question of sometimes access to a huge bureaucracy that tries, but often fails to be inclusive. Being able to just kind of leverage those opportunities is critical because, as I mentioned before, we can put out a solicitation, we can make nice websites with information. That doesn't mean that alone isn't communication. That's a resource. That is not a communication piece, in my opinion. So just knowing that there's a lot of work to be done with that communication side of things and bringing in community voice and really just having meaningful conversations. We're not always going to agree, but we should always be listening to each other. And I mean, this kind of just supports kind of my experience of knowing that we have a lot of work to do in that space.
Thank you so much. And Kylie, also as one of our speakers and someone who is leading one of the breakout groups, is there any reflection that you might offer to the group or a common question to address here at the end?
So I think I would just say where we left off in our breakout was talking about how this can all be given that we aren't just talking about state and local fiscal recovery funds, we're talking about the rest of the American Rescue Plan and, the funding that was already there in the first place. I guess I would just want to say that, which I already said to Suzanne, I think you are right to be puzzled, but you can put the puzzle together if you are intentional about working closely with your partners in your community. It is complicated and it is obtuse and opaque a lot of the times. But just very, very encouraged to hear how committed everybody is to getting to a place where things are more transparent, and we're all able to benefit from that, I think. So that's all I would say. Just thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you so much. And if others would like to just offer any closing reflections in the chat, please do. That would be really terrific. We're so thankful to all of you for joining us here today. I'll just offer up a couple of quick notes that stood out to me from our speakers and also from the questions that I was hearing that I think are so important as we all work towards making sure that young people receive the supports that they need. I was so appreciative to hear the focus on equity, really thinking about where dollars are going, which organizations are getting them, who they're serving, so much about using data and engaging community and young people themselves to make sure that the people with the highest need are really the ones who are being served, and really thinking about how to adjust processes and requirements so that the organizations that are best positioned to do this work can be the ones that have the opportunity and the role of building trust and relationships and all of that. So thank you so much to our speakers. And Joanne, if you would turn on for us a final survey before everybody logs off, we'd love to get your feedback about this session. Thank you so much. We will be holding some more events similar to this, so we'd love to have folks join us. And also a special thanks to the Annie E. Casey Foundation for the funding that they provided to help support this particular event, as well as our partners at the Children's Funding Projects. Right. And again, if folks have any questions, please feel free to follow up with us. We will also be sending around recording links, other resources that have been mentioned here from the chat or just in the conversation. And we're just really so thankful to everyone for the hard work that you're doing on the grounds and in the organizations wherever you are.